a big fan of movies, and I have about a 5-way tie for first place among my favorite movies of all time. And one of those movies that is in a 5-way tie is Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. If you haven't seen it, it sounds like most of you have, but if you haven't seen it, the plot's actually pretty simple. Bill Murray is reliving the same day over and over and over again. It's Groundhog Day. I was actually saddened because I couldn't watch it this year on Groundhog Day, but that's beside the point. It's a great movie, and so he's reliving the same day over and over again, and he starts out as a very immature person, very selfish, self-centered, and by the end of the movie, what finally breaks him out of that cycle is the fact that he grows throughout the movie and learns what it means to love authentically, to love for the sake of the other. And it is love that then, obviously, at the end of the movie, breaks him free from that, and he wakes up and it is the next day. Now, there's a very, very beautiful, very profoundly Catholic film, subtly so, and I love the transformation that takes place for Bill Murray, and again, moving through all of those stages of development that all of us hopefully are moving through as well. Now, the reason I mention all of that is that the focus is on his love for the woman, the woman in the film. And so most of it is directed towards how he learns to love her authentically. But there's something that's very profound that happens on the final day where we recognize that he has completely turned the corner and is the last day. Something very profound happens that I didn't notice the first 100 times I watched the movie. Again, most of the last day is focused on this woman, but in the beginnings of the day, Bill Murray runs around and does lots of tasks that you realize the author of the film and so forth is suggesting that he's been doing these small little things over and over again for a long time now. So even though he knew the next day was going to repeat, he continued to do these little tasks. So for example, on this final day, we see him going and helping these 4 older women who had a flat tire. And he goes and changes it for them. You see him he knows that a certain young child falls out of a tree every day at a specific time. And so you see him looking at his watch, he realizes he's late and he's running, and he catches the child again and he sets him down and the kid runs off. And he says, "You've never thanked me one time." Implying again that he's been doing this for a long time. Right? And there are several other things that he does. And what struck me about that, and I think that, again, there's something very beautiful and Catholic about that, in the fact that it is in the ordinary little tasks that we grow in virtue, that we learn to love. It is in these ordinary, repeated tasks of everyday life. This weekend and this week in our church, the bishops of the United States hold up for us this idea, we call this Marriage Sunday. And then throughout this week, Marriage Week, the bishops asking us to pray for marriages, to pray for those who are preparing for marriage, those who are living marriage out. And I think obviously one of the reasons is that in the gospel today, Jesus speaks about marriage, right, very clearly, and talks about the importance of it. And so one of the things that, then to tie that into what I was mentioning earlier, I've realized as a person, first of all, watching my own parents in their marriage, and then now watching my siblings and my good friends that I grew up with, watching them in their marriages, watching all of you in your marriages, realized the very profound insight of the film. And again, it's not that that's the only place. We hear that from many other saints and other places as well. The idea and the importance of the ordinary. The idea that it is in those moments, in those ways, the day in, day out, repeated tasks of life that we, in fact, grow in love. And there's the world is telling us, right? You need to fight back against that. You need to be more spontaneous. You need to be more adventurous. That telling us that the routine of life is crushing and that it's boring and all of these other sorts of things, and we must flee it and we must be all these sorts of things. The devil is in our ear whispering that all the time. There's a better life for you out there, somewhere else. Leave your life, move on, do something else. Seek another vocation, whatever it might be. There's that temptation. And it takes on different terms or whatever, it's different suggestions. For me, it's leave and go be a mountain climber in Colorado. Maybe that's not the one for you. But we have, all of us, right? We have those suggestions rolling around in the back of our mind. That idea and that notion that my daily life and the routine of it is crushing and oppressive and meant to be cast off. That we oftentimes maybe even think, I'm doing this wrong because I'm so sort of ground down. It's in fact, again, I think that's one of the notions that we see in the film too. I think that's why so many people identify with it, particularly in the first world. We believe that day in and day out, so often it feels like the same day, and we feel crushed by that. We feel burdened by that. Our marriages, we think that a lot of times, well, my marriage is so ordinary. I have these same things that I do. I get up and I have breakfast and I go off to work, or I make breakfast for the kids and then I do this. And we do this and it's Mondays, the same as Tuesdays, the same as Wednesday. I must be doing it wrong. And that voice is telling us, be more adventurous. There's something better for you, etc., etc. This isn't just the case for marriages, it's the case for everybody. It's a case for priests, it's a case for religious brothers and sisters, for teenagers. All of us seek to confront the ordinary, and sometimes we struggle with it. Why is it that Jesus cares so much about marriage? Why is it that he speaks so strongly about marriage in the Gospels? The reason Jesus cares so much about these things, and particularly about marriage, is because St. Paul says elsewhere, and the church says it too, that marriage has, first of all, the function of helping man and wife, helping one another grow in holiness. But also that marriage is meant to show the world the type of love that God has for us. That's a very profound call and challenging call. Your role in marriage is to show the world the type of love that God has for us. So I ought to see in marriages an image of the love that God has for me. And your coworker ought to see in your marriage an image of the love that God has for them. It's a very challenging, but also a very noble task that marriage has been given. So, recognizing all of this, what's the point? St. Paul says something in our second reading that I hope ties all of this together. He says, we, Christians, we speak God's wisdom, mysterious and hidden. God's wisdom is mysterious and it is hidden. Why is God hidden? Is God hiding from us? And the answer to that must clearly be no, because no one desires us more. No one desires more to be found than God. God desires unity with us, union with each of us, always. So what must be the case then is that God is hidden because we don't know where to look. Where do we not know to look? We do not look in the ordinary. We do not look so often in the midst of our ordinary day in and day out lives. We don't look for the love of a spouse. We don't think that anything profound is happening because the same days are repeating over and over again in our relationships with our spouses, with our friends, with our family. Nor do we think that God is in the midst of the day in, the day out, the routine. So we go searching for God on our terms, right? In the same way that we so often go looking for marriage to be something that we feel like it ought to be. And so we are very often disappointed. We have some other movie in the background, some Disney version of love or whatever it might be, so we expect and we put that on our marriage. We expect our marriage to meet our terms. We tell ourselves, if this marriage were truly fantastic, it would meet at these types of things would be happening. And in the same way, I think we do that to God. We think that we know how God ought to be, what our relationship with God ought to be, and how God ought to reveal God's self to us. And so we put these standards on God that God has never said are real. We might think that only God is present only in the midst of great signs or great emotions or great feelings, etc., etc. But we speak God's wisdom, which is mysterious and is hidden. God is found in the midst of the ordinary and in the midst of the routine. We hear that from saint after saint after saint. He's not in great signs, he's not in earthquakes, and in the same way our marriages are not sustained and are not often experienced in that way. And yet how often in our lives, in the midst of it when we think this day is just the same as the last day and is the same, and I just keep doing these ordinary tasks and nothing happens, how often a couple of years later do we look back on those times and say something profound and miraculous was happening back then? How often in the midst of our faith life as well do we think, I'm just at Mass again, just like I was last Sunday, and I just keep praying, and nothing's happening, and I go to confession, and it's not really working. And yet a couple of years in the future, we look back on that time, and we see the ways in which God has been changing us, and has been affecting us, and drawing near to us. And so just like a marriage that is sustained and deepened in the ordinary tasks of everyday life, and love is found there, in the same way, the ordinary interactions with God are found in the ordinary interactions of daily life. The routine. I've realized that I have celebrated now about 3,500 Masses as a priest. In only 2 of them have I ever had some sort of emotional experience or feeling wash over me at any point. And yet I know, in looking back over those times, that I have deepened in my love for God in great ways by being here at those Masses. That despite me not being able to feel God in perhaps the way that I would want God to be near to me, or I think God ought to be, that God nonetheless was having and doing and changing me through those experiences. We find God in weekly Mass, in coming over and over again, by going to confession regularly, by doing great acts of charity over and over again for our family, for our children, for our spouses, for the poor, by praying regularly day in and day out despite not necessarily feeling anything in the midst of that, as the great saints so often attest. St. Paul says that this is an idea, a concept that the rulers of this world do not get. Why? Because the rulers of the world, if they think something ought to happen, it usually does. If this needs to be lowered, or that needs to be raised, or this decision has to be made, it often is. It is the ordinary people of life who do not necessarily have that happen, and who have to recognize and realize and hopefully fall in love with the ordinary. And so for this reason, I say it is good to be here with you today at this boring Mass. Today we pray for marriages. We will bless anniversaries at the end of Mass. We pray for all of the marriages in our families, our own marriages, our friends, marriage in our community. We pray for the strength to love in the midst of the routine of life, to recognize love in the midst of the ordinary, day in and day out, and to know that in the same way, no matter our state in life, God's love also comes to us in the ordinary and in the routine.